Atima Omara.
Atima Omara.
Atima Omara.
And Atima Omara is a Democratic strategist and the former president of Young Democrats of America.
When I was younger, I always wanted to find a way to make impact. Whether that was I was going to be a doctor or a lawyer, the way my immigrant parents expected me to be.
When we first met, I told you I love the title of your book, right? I'm like, it just has so much kinetic energy. You know, the word instigator with a capital I is how you describe a very specific kind of leader. What makes someone an instigator versus just an activist or an organizer or a politician?
What classifies an instigator and how I sort of define it is somebody who...
So let's make sure the recording's on, and then let's put Atima in the spotlight and let's have this conversation. Hey, Atima. Good. How are you? We were asking Atima before she jumped in, like, what is the honest assessment of going into this book launch that you're feeling at the moment?
Somebody said online yesterday, it was an author, like, is it possible to die from a book launch? Yeah, there's definitely a couple times where I'm like, oh, I could at least end up in the hospital from exhaustion.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for keeping it real, because I want y'all to know who are listening in. That's why authors mean so much to me personally. Obviously, I'm an author as well, but it means so much because I know the effort that goes in. There's a lot of aspiration to be an author, to get a traditional publishing deal. And I bet, Atima, you had the same kind of dreams and aspirations. That's why you pursued this. And then you got it and you're like, oh, hell now. I got to not just write it, edit it, but then launch the book. So let me kind of like set us up for today's conversation, because I want to be clear to everybody listening. Quick heads up, The Instigators, which is Atima Omara's book, How Black Women Have Been Essential to American Democracy and What We Can Learn from Them, officially launches May 4th, right, Atima? May 4th is the official. May 5th, I'm sorry, May 5th.
Yeah.
And, well, May 4th is like the day, actually, this is why we're in the pre-launch phase right now. Pre-launch orders are so important to an author's book results. And so the single most powerful thing that you can do for Atima right now is pre-order it. And pre-orders are how this book will land on the bestsellers list and get it into more people's hands. So please, right now, if you haven't pre-ordered her book, pre-order it from your favorite indie store. You can go to bookshop.org, or Atima, even if you can, or team, I know that we also set it up. Please put in the chat how it will be easy for people to pre-order the book, whether Amazon or another place. And if you're feeling extra generous, after you pre-order it, take a screenshot. You can even take a screenshot right now and put it on Instagram or LinkedIn or whatever that you're in this room, and tag Atima and tell people, please order this book. I want to make sure we get that out of the way. I have no shame in my game to like say, we got to get behind Atima's book and really help her get the word out, because most people write books and they're excellent books like Atima's book. I read it and I was a very lucky pre-reader of her book. She sent me the manuscript even before it was in its final edits. So I had the pleasure and privilege to read it early. And I mean it when I say this book is so important, especially right now, given the state of democracy in the United States. And we need to put people in the spotlight that need to be spotlit. If everybody can do their part, you know, and at the minimum, even if it's like, if pre-ordering is not something you can do at the moment, please share that you are supporting the book in some way. That is how we can thank Atima, because again, she's on a million podcasts, a million stages. She's promoting her book on the streets, you know, and so the way we can really help an author is, at least at the minimum, get a shout out on social media, just to keep it far and wide during the pre-launch period. So I just wanted to say that up front. Okay. So with that said, Atima, I'm going to go ahead and read a bio of you for everyone so that they get to know you, and you can feel free to, after, tell them a little bit more about yourself. But I'm going to read the official bio that I wrote for Atima. So Atima Omara, she is a political strategist and organizer, and the founder of Omara Strategy Group, where she advises candidates and movement organizations representing the rising rising American majority. She's the American-born daughter of two African immigrants whose Pan-Africanist beliefs shaped her lifelong commitment to civil rights and inclusive democracy. 2013 to 2015, she served as president of the Young Democrats of America, becoming the first Black person and only the fifth woman elected to lead the organization in its 90-year history. She was elected statewide to represent Virginia at the Democratic National Committee from 2016 to 2024. She's worked for the governor and dozens of candidates at every level of office and has been a candidate herself. So you've also probably seen her on CNN, MSNBC, PBS, BBC, NPR, or Fox News. I mean, in fact, if you go to Atima's YouTube or you Google her right now, you will see her on all those major stations giving her commentary and being the go-to expert to comment on political movement in the United States. And she's also written in the Washington Post, The Nation, The Root, Teen Vogue, and The American Prospect. And her writing also appears in the 2024 anthology Wake Up America, Black Women on the Future of Democracy. As we talked about, she's releasing her first traditionally published book called The Instigators, How Black Women Have Been Essential to American Democracy and What We Can Learn from Them, from HarperCollins. It's part history, part memoir, part strategic field guide, and entirely necessary for the moment we are in. And today we get a first look before the world does. So please join me in welcoming Atima Omara. I mean, my goodness, girl, you've got like receipts to the nth of the receipts, right? So she is overqualified to write this book and to have this conversation with us. And I know if you're in the room, you're probably values aligned like we are, right? About these types of things. And so again, I just want to say thank you because this is a contribution to the world that we need more of, to have diverse thought, opinion, and cultures speaking on the state of the world that we live in. So Atima, is there anything else you want to say about yourself before I get into some of the questions I prepared for you today?
Oh gosh. Well, I will say, I mean, you covered quite a bit. Thank you for that generous rework of my bio. I would say that I would add, when I was a kid, I have this you kind of have a sense of your core person of who you are, even if it gets warped and changed by societal and family expectations. There's always like a core kind of person of who you are. And like when I was younger, I always wanted to find a way to make impact. And whether that was I was going to be a doctor or a lawyer, the way my immigrant parents expected me to be, or, you know, initially I thought I'd go into journalism, whether I was, you know, working in the arts, I knew whatever I wanted to do. I wanted to find a way to leave the world a little better than I found it, and contribute in a way that would be kind of a part of my legacy and my contribution. And so I didn't think it was ever going to be politics. It was something that felt far away from me, especially when you looked at politics. The 90s, it was very, very white. But that has been my journey and has, I think, contributed and made me even a better business leader, and has actually made it, in some ways, easy to kind of promote a book, because I've learned how campaigns and marketing and engaging with people and all of that is critical to the success of these things. Not a lot of authors are keen to be in the public. You'll find a lot of introverts who are authors. So
thanks for sharing that. I want to jump into the book first and then talk about also like the charge that you have for all of us as fellow instigators. You know, you did open up the book by claiming and naming your own origin story as being the American-born daughter of two African immigrants who watched their own country's young democracy collapse and came to the United States with a lot of hope. That was a really powerful frame to open up the book with. And I want to talk about the instigator behind the book, which is you, and in a lot of ways your parents, right? By name and claiming their part in it. So how did your parents' experience with the failing democracy shape what you noticed about the United States? And when did you first realize that noticing that was going to become your life's work?
I mean, when I was younger, I remember things like watching The Sound of Music, one of my favorite, musicals of all time, and reading books about World War II, because we were in that era, we were on the 30th and the 40th anniversary of World War II, and, discovering these concentration camps and understanding what, Nazi Germany had sort of wrought in lots of different communities. And it was that point, it was very sort of academic, but like as I got older, my mom and my dad kind of relayed stories, really were like impressing upon me the similarity of authoritarianism and, why we should guard against it, and also educating me on the history of the US and the ways in which, people who didn't look like a lot of us in this room were pushing very much us to the margins, whether that was the Chinese Exclusion Act or trying to keep disabled people locked up in institutions, to the institution of slavery, Jim Crow, and Prevention of Voting Rights, and that the fact that women as a whole, the suffrage amendment, the 19th Amendment passed in the early 20th century, but then that really only applied to white women because of disenfranchisement in the South, where a lot of them were not allowed to still vote until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So, that included a lot of other communities who'd been disenfranchised as well. And so that education and that history and the amazing people who pushed back against those things just really informed me and was powerful to me in how could I contribute and give back that project in whatever way that I could, not thinking it would end up in the way it did end up in my career, but definitely impressed upon me the importance of the democratic experiment, and that you have to remain vigilant in keeping it, because otherwise it will atrophy.
Oh, absolutely. I think we've noticed the outcomes of atrophy, because I truly believe that we wouldn't be in this case if almost Americans got too lethargic in their vigilance, as you said, because we've allowed these forces that don't work for everyone's benefit, only for a few people's benefit, and I think all of us in this room would agree that we know that power machine still runs, but at least the government had a little bit of, I don't even want to call it balance, but had some level of boundary around how extreme you could get. And it's very fascinating to watch this experiment, and it sucks to be in it too, right? Like, how many of you guys agree? I feel like it sucks. I kind of miss being a Generation Xer myself, although it was the era of Reagan and all that. And it felt like a really growth period for the United States. It was all still also leading to what's happening right now. You can plot out all of that. It's just, and again, I'm grateful for people like you who this is your part of your work, and see how human dynamics work through politics. Because me as a brand strategist, I say all the time, brand is really shaped by politics and pop culture. And when we say that business isn't political, that's BS. Life is very political. It affects everyone. The minute that we think that it doesn't affect us, we'll turn into either anarchy or autocracy. And so it's just juicy. We could talk about that all day. But now I want to get into the thesis of the book, because when we first met, I told you I love the title of your book, right? I'm like, it just has so much kinetic energy. The word instigator with a capital I is how you describe a very specific kind of leader, from Ida B. Wells to Mary McLeod Bethune to Mari Copeny, that 8-year-old from Flint, Michigan. And so for people who haven't gotten to read the book yet, which is most of you because it's in pre-order, as I said earlier, what makes someone an instigator versus just an activist or an organizer or a politician? And once you start using that lens, who surprised you the most as you did all the research for this book?
Yeah. Well, what classifies an instigator and how I sort of define it as somebody who, I was reclaiming that word, because oftentimes when we use the word, it's to talk about somebody trying to start trouble. It's often weaponized against women, especially women of color, pushing back against systemic and structural discrimination, oppression, as it were. When I looked at sort of the definition of instigator, I wanted to think of somebody who was at the vanguard, the forefront, fighting for change, initiating things. And instigator was a word that came up because one of the definitions of the word is somebody who initiates things for change and takes action. And that's what every single one of the women that I write about in this book, whether in the past as historical figures or currently today, whether it's they started organizations, they decided to bankroll, organize their own campaigns for public office, they started their own media platforms and built their own presence without the assistance of mainstream corporate media. They became organizers and really stood up organizations or projects that would empower their communities. Those are the people who, it's not just I've run into a lot of people in this work, I'm sure you all have, where you're like, okay, you're not really, you're running for office and it's supposed to be a public service, but you kind of tell it's a lot more about them and less about the impact they're making. I recently saw like an interview with Zohran Mamdani about how it's difficult work to be a public servant, but it's also really rewarding. And he recounts how, there was a woman who was showing like this part of her apartment that was just eroding and iron and rust and all of this stuff. And he asked her how long it had been like that. And she pointed to her son. They had lived in that apartment for 20 years. He was 20 years old. And, they had just recently upgraded like a lot of the housing code and provided funding to ensure that a lot of these standards were improved, which meant her apartment and where she lived would be improved, and she would no longer be in this environment that was not good for her to live and her family. And it's just like that in and of itself is rewarding, and that he has that ethos of sort of like very much of an instigator who's like, all right, things need to be fixed. I'm going to go about initiating change and doing the thing that needs to be done because other people wouldn't be doing it. He was not, was not a star by any stretch of the imagination before he ran for mayor. He was a state legislator in New York, and he was doing a good job, but no one really knew who he was. He had the lowest name recognition, but taking that stand, things that he was going to do and doing them from day one has certainly impressed a lot of people, even people who didn't support him necessarily.
Well, again, by the way, too, so when you pre-order her book, she also has incentives and prizes. So you can even go to her website, right, Atima, and you can also order merch, like her sweatshirt. So if you're like, I want to like that I'm an instigator, go have some fun with that. We all love a ball cap and a sweatshirt. Am I right? My fancy, lazy friends. Now I actually do. You were kind of talking about strategy and a little bit too. To me, it made me peek into your strategist brain a little bit more as you were talking about that, because you're not just a writer who's telling these stories. You're actually, as I said in your bio, you're a working political strategist. Mm-hmm. You've actually run for office, you've managed campaigns, you served on the DNC, you built your own consulting firm, and you did it also as an entrepreneur, which is also different than a lot of people do in addition to now being an author. And what I read about you is that you didn't really want to mold women of color candidates into anything less than who they were in essence. So I want to ask you a strategist question. When you look across the instigators, past and present, what are some of the repeatable strategies and traits you saw show up over and over? What is like some of the playbook you noticed from people who are doing the instigator work so that we can learn how to be better instigators?
Yeah, absolutely. They were people who did not wait to be asked to do anything. They saw something that they wanted to change that could be better, looked around, thought, is anybody else going to do this? No, I'm going to step up. I'm going to do this thing. Shirley, there's actual research that says that women have to be asked a few times to run for public office. Shirley Chisholm didn't wait. She became the first Black woman elected to Congress. She didn't wait. She saw a seat open up. She put in the work, she felt like, as a state assemblywoman, and having worked in her community for years in nonprofit organizations, running daycare centers, serving in her Democratic committee, electing other people to public office. She's like, I ain't gonna wait. If I wait for somebody to ask me, I'm gonna keep waiting. There are other folks like that. One other good example, Danielle Moody. She's a modern day instigator. She's a friend of mine who, had a media platform that she built by herself, doing podcasts with her then wife, and then got an opportunity to have a show with Sirius XM. And then, a couple things she said, they were like, you know what, thank you for your services. We no longer need you. And, she lost her platform like that. But while she was devastated, she pivoted off of that and was like, all right, I am going to go continue to speak my truth and rebuild my platform and do what I always do best, which is educate the public about what's happening, and rebranded and started her own, show that still runs. She was invited to do stuff with even Daily Beast and other major outlets after that. These are people who are continuously making a way out of no way, who are finding the creative ways to make sure that people have what they need to survive and to thrive and to fight back. One of my other favorites was Molly Moon. She's lesser known in movement spaces, but because of her, her networks of people who had dollars, she was able to raise money for the National Urban League that helped funded a lot of civil rights organizing. She was living between New York and DC, but helped fund a lot of the organizing that was happening in the South. And she was raising that money from business owners, fellow nonprofit leaders, people who had money. Like one of her donors was a Rockefeller. And so when we think also as like business women, like how can we contribute, especially when we're so like strapped and busy. Like I'm in this work by default of what my work is, but some of you I know, like, okay, I have branding, I do marketing, I do PR, I do coaching. There are ways for you to contribute and utilize your networks of fellow business owners to diffuse capital into the movement as well. So it's just the different ways that they persisted and tried to find a way to make an impact and were stubborn about it. And even when their lives were being threatened or their careers were being threatened, Mary McLeod Bethune, she's a serial entrepreneur when you think of her life. She started a university as a young Black woman that still exists today. She started a hospital when she realized people in her community where she lived were not getting proper health care because healthcare services were segregated and therefore less quality for Black people if they could even get care at all. She had voter education programs as part of the students' learning, but also wanted to make sure people in the community benefited from it. So for her, it was important to combine entrepreneurship with mutual aid and supporting the community and literacy and voter education, to use it all collectively to build power for communities that did not have power. That's the things that really struck me, was the ingenuity, the fearlessness, the willing to do the work when no one else was willing to do it, and constantly just pivoting and thinking of ways to benefit their community.
And I'm going to say these are examples, and it doesn't matter if it happened 40 years ago or it's happening now. This is something you can't delegate to the machines, like that level of fortitude of change. They basically had personal brands. They were thought leaders of their time and then did something about it, right? And so I think that's really cool. Now, I have a question I've been wanting to ask you. That's why I'm like, this is the juicy question on my question list about the 2024 election, right? I mean, I'm traumatized from 2016. It's like when my mom and dad could remember when Elvis died, and then I remember when the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded in '86. I know exactly where I was. It was like, yes, it's like 2016 and 2024. I know exactly where I was when the current president of the United States came into office, and it makes me sick. And so in your book, you wrote that part of you wishes you'd gotten wasted drunk on election night 2024. And I felt that. I got wasted drunk in 2016. I never thought it would happen again. Like in 2016, I wasn't drunk. I was ready to celebrate. And then after that, I got really sickly drunk and vomited in my hotel room because I was in Austin, Texas when 2016 happened. But you also push back hard on the post-election narrative, blaming Vice President Harris and identity politics. And you're also critical of the popularist playbook coming from the Democratic leadership right now. And so I wanted to get a little bit more specific. What do you think the left is getting wrong the most in this moment? And what would it actually look like to take a page from the instigators instead? Because I'm with you. When I think about Republicans, the left and the right is better at marketing. They're better at loyalty. They're better at, whether I don't agree with their policies, but they're better at that. And the left, in my, not even opinion, the facts show that right even now, we don't even know who the 2028 candidate's going to be, in my opinion. Like, I don't even know. We can't even get our act together in California right now. I'm really nervous about California. Yeah. And that is our job if we lean left or we're left. So tell me what you think we need to do.
Gosh. So for me, I think of every single major social movement that has enacted progress in this country. And it has been by people who were instigators, whether they were in elected office as the instigator or they were organizers or fundraisers. And they were people who might have had to push gradually, but they pushed. And then when the window opened to make a lot of big change, and in public policy, we call that the Overton window, where this opportunity, presents itself to really push through a lot of policy, then they really jump on that, right? They are consistent in their values. They are not just seeing what the opposition is doing and then bending and shaping their narrative and their messaging to reflect that. which is what I basically consider popularist ideology. It's like, we can't, if people want to talk about immigration, we want to talk, the Democrats will say, and the people who are the popularists in the Democratic Party will say, people want to talk about immigration, so we should talk about immigration. But we're talking about immigration because the Republicans set the narrative that that's what we should be talking about.
We're in defense. Yeah.
We're in defense. We're not in offense.
Yeah.
You know, the window has opened. People are now like F ICE all around the country. And now we have a window that is open to do some really, and put forward some really thoughtful proposals on immigration and the path to citizenship finally, because people understand what is happening and the injustice of what is happening.
They're also feeling the economic impact, because if immigrants are hiding, who's going to work these fields? White people don't want those jobs.
Right. There was articles about women who are now having to stay home because their childcare is in hiding. Literally. Right. Yeah. It's like, you know, and then we have these wars that we're in, and like it's all of these things that sort of round its way out. And I guess what I would say is that they could take a stance, and that they could actually go into, like, in Congress, okay, yes, we're not in power, but maybe actually propose policies of the things you are going to do. You say there's an affordability crisis. What are the bills you're going to suggest? The Voting Rights Act from the Supreme Court was further gutted today. What's the funding we're going to give to organizations willing to do aggressive, innovative work on the ground to register people to vote, to pass state voting rights act laws, all of that? Like, it is thinking, being in sort of very, having an ingenuity way. I'm trying to like talk right now. I've been talking all day, but have a very interesting way in thinking and continuously pivoting to how they can do things that are aggressive and not sort of in a, I would like, let me say, like how you like the possum or the dog rolls over on their tummy and like, don't stab me. I'm just going to do this. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because that's why, you know, it's either they're been branded as the radical left, but the populist, the middle of the ground is that. And then if you're too radical, it can't bring forward or meet people in the middle, because what the right is really good at is picking a few key themes that they own the narrative on, right? Whether it's abortion, immigration, frankly, white nationalism, right? Whatever they own, they go in fully. We spread ourselves across the board and criticize more than rally around a few core solutions. Versus, like, we name the problem a lot and we defend the problem a lot, but we don't name the solutions and then aggressively go after it and work the streets. I think one thing I want to offer is, I think what the populists do too is they are so righteous on the coast, and I live on the coast, so I'm saying this as a California coastal person. You being in DC, you like live in the heart, everything. Yeah. We are just too smart, and we don't meet the people. I'm not saying people in the Midwest aren't smart. I'm just saying, like, meeting them with their real needs and speaking to them and actually finding the pockets like they did in Georgia, I thought really well, you know, in the midterms after 2016, of like, they found those pockets and they went after them. And that wasn't even radical left. It was populists getting smart about how to have and meet people where they are. And I think that if we did more of that, instead of sat in our academic, righteous conversations, and then again, look to the leaders who've done this that you've written about in your book of how they did it, we'd be doing better. And so, and we've got to do that together. That's part of what we're doing here, is like trying to see where like we can find the common threads and go after it together, because we're stronger together and they work against us when we're not. And that's why they've been winning, whether we know it or not, you know?
I mean, one of the good example of it for me is when I see how much funding goes to influencers on the right. Like, if you wanted to be somebody who just says the most provocative things online, you're getting tons
Andrew
of
Tate.
Right. You just getting tons of dollars and support and elevation to be able to do that. And on the left, we have some brilliant people who have used their platforms, who, you know, there's a one I follow. I'm doing an IG live with her next Tuesday, Elizabeth Booker at Houston at Booker Squared. And she is a trained lawyer, decorated, you know, was actually higher up in the federal government before Trump took over the second time. And she basically break down anything legal and make it as accessible as possible on her IG, I think she's on Threads, TikTok platforms. And people will say, I never checked into politics. I never, like, I knew stuff was not right, but like, it just seemed over my head. But you make it accessible, and you're literally like my first follow on politics and understanding how I can get involved and engaged. And that's what we need to be doing, and that's what we need to be supporting. What are the new, and she's an instigator in my definition. She's like, all right, I'm gonna find a way to reach as many people as possible with my platform. And she just continued to build off her platform, where now she's trying to carry a lot of the messages and explain to people, here's what you can do and how you can do it. And that's the type of thing that we should be doing.
It's like, I know another person that has not just endorsed your book, but you're speaking to in your launch of the book is Shannon Watts, founded what is basically the evolution of Moms Against Drunk Driving. Her organization is, gun control, and being a white woman who's able to say, she's talking about guns in a way, in my opinion, that's very clear, takes a stance. She's clearly left leaning, but like still can write it a way that like speaks to the heart of the moms who are, or parents who are concerned about guns and gun violence with their children. And it's this kind of way in studying. That's why, back to like reading Atima's book, not just read the stories, but study the innovative and ingenuous ways that Atima's been saying. It's about, that's the strategist mind. It's not just the reading to be inspired, but it's the reading to study the strategies, which is what I geek out about, being who I am. So, all right. So I want to just ask one more question before we open up the floor. Because I want to open up the floor to be in action, to start to be instigating in a way that's shifting the status quo. And so you write in the book that democracy is not and never has been a spectator's sport. That's a quote from your book. And you also dedicated the book to all the women and girls of color instigating for a just and inclusive world where we can all thrive. For the people in this room tonight or listening to the replay, or anybody who listens in, volunteers, donors, future candidates, writers, and the everyday folks who don't have a title yet, they want to write a book that makes an impact like you've so bravely done and that you're doing right now. What's the most important thing you want us to walk out of here and do this week? Not next year, not think about, not next week, but this week, today, and the next 7 days. What's something you want to charge us with to be instigating?
Think of something you care about in your community, something that is inequitable, is an injustice, and what is the unique way what you offer can empower people, can make impact in your community. I use as an example Minnesota recently, because that was a very good example of taking a lot of the principles that I talk about that the instigators used, where you saw people who were everyday folks who had regular jobs and came home and had dinner with their family, watched their TV show, went to bed, and, rinse and repeat. And then they saw what was happening in Minnesota and in their communities, and that their immigrant neighbors were in hiding. You had everybody figuring out how to step up. The business owning community in Minnesota, you had retail shops opening up their storefronts as hubs for people to pack groceries, or donating food from their stores to folks donating if they were, maybe marketers or legal folks, like donating their hours of service to help design flyers for campaigns and rallies, to legal services for folks who needed a lawyer to show up for the family or educate them on their rights, essentially, to folks who have a very good strategic mind and can lay out, all right, how do we organize this now operation to shuttle kids to school when their parents no longer can do that because they're in hiding? It's all of these things. So what is the way in which you can contribute? And I often tell all my colleagues who are entrepreneurs, we're strapped thin, where most of us are running smaller operations. We do not have the Elon and Bezos books, but there are ways to make impact in our community. Small businesses hold up the economy, and we can find ways to contribute. And you just have to think about what that is, what that talent is. It could even be just coaching, and training folks, facilitating space, offering space, whatever that is. Just think about what that might be for you.
And I know one easy way that in the next 7 days, everybody can do something, and that is share this book. It's so easy even just to hit share off Atima's Instagram page, to take her LinkedIn and reshare it, and just say, hey, I pre-ordered this book, or I think this book has some strategies that can support your organization or you. That is an easy thing that we can all do for less than $30 right now. And I know Atima is not going to say that, so that's why I'm going to say it. She's not paying me to say this, right, Atima? I'm saying it because these are the little ways. This is why even the Thought Leadership Collective exists, is because it's about, you can make a big difference by sharing the right knowledge with other people. That is a huge way with a small investment to do it. I just wanted to add like some ways that I've been doing that, because I don't know about any of you, but do you feel overwhelmed daily about all this bullshit and noise that we're constantly being pummeled with? Like, what's the next alarm that's sounding from the White House today? Any of you feel like that? Are we alone? Because I don't think I'm alone. Yeah. So again, it's like, what can you do even locally? As Atima said, it's like, help out a neighbor, show kindness, have a conversation with somebody who may not even be, you think, or at least on the same page as you. Support like local politics, because obviously we're stressed out at the national level right now and the global level, but a lot of the power comes in your neighborhood. That's what I also want to say. But again, it's by sharing these important books, not just sharing your top 10 books that everybody shares. One way you could do it is like, what are the books that aren't shared as much? Pull those down and share them. What about you naming that you're on the journey to like write more and speak your word? You can do that today. You don't have to wait for that vision to come true.